This is Africa 24, the channel that puts Africa first. Thank you very much for being with us for a new edition of the interview. Today we are with Pamela Milton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. With her, we look back at the trade and investment opportunities and bottlenecks between Africa and the Caribbean in the light of the reform of the financial architecture. Mrs. Pamela Milton, welcome to Africa 24 English.
Thank you, Catherine. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Let's get into the matter. The 31st annual meeting of Afreximbank and the 3rd Africa-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum are being held under the overall theme, Taking Our Destiny in Hand, Economic Prosperity on the Platform of Global Africa. In your opinion, is the theme timely in a context where African and the Caribbean countries are struggling to trade with each other at a regional level?
I think it's timely because we have to move the narrative away from what is difficult to what is possible, and also what is important. So for me, it's not just a question of figuring out whether this can work. It is deciding that this is where we want to go and putting in place the mechanics to make it happen. The concept of global Africa is based upon the same Pan-African vision of Kwame Nkrumah and all the other major leaders from Africa and the Caribbean in the time of decolonization. This is now taking it a step further to economic independence, to economic growth, to economic development. If we look at the terms of trade for the last 400 years, they've remained the same. Primary commodities, extraction, they go to the metropole, they come back. Trade between Africa and the Caribbean, yes, has challenges. We're going to have issues with logistics, we have issues with, the financial transactions. There are many challenges, tariffs and non-tariff barriers. However, I believe that we have those same issues with other trading partners, but we make it work. And how do we make it work? By negotiating terms. And so I think this is the opportunity for us to open the door to negotiating terms.
In that light, what are then the stakes for both regions in terms of trade, investment, and also infrastructure?
What are the stakes? Well, for example, our trade right now is minimal. Less than 0.1% of African exports come to the Caribbean. Less than 3% of Caribbean exports go to Africa. And that has fallen. It was higher before. The stakes are that this is a potential opportunity for us to enter and trade with natural allies. We don't have to build a market. The markets are there. The natural desire for the goods and services between Africa and the Caribbean don't need a brand or a selling point. They're already established. So it is to begin to work the actual streams to make this happen. And that's why we've identified 5 specific value chains that we think could actually be very profitable for the region. And we've determined in our update of the study that there's a potential of $1.8 billion per year up to 2028 in potential trade between the two regions. And so that's a major opportunity just sitting there. What we need to now do is drill down and figure out, how do we make this happen? How do we put in place the logistics, the trade mechanisms, removing the tariffs and the barriers? How do we ensure that the trade actually can occur?
Mrs. Hamilton, you mentioned some value chains. In 2022, the International Trade Center, your institution, published a report identifying over $1 billion export potential between Africa and the Caribbean, indicating that a channeling investment into growth areas, Africa could increase its merchandise exports to the Caribbean by 54% by 2026. What do you see as priority sectors for investment?
Some of the priority sectors that we've identified, and we've done an update to that study this year, and we're going to launch it this year. But first of all, the amount has moved up to 1.8 billion from 1 billion in 2 years, which tells you something. Something is happening. The second is that the main value chains that we've identified are with the minerals, and secondly, agribusiness, because of course agribusiness is a natural fit for both of us. We also have been looking at paper, plastic, and wood products. We've been looking at the creative industries and how that could actually work towards bringing the regions together, because there's also a natural fit. We have also been trying to see how one of the other areas is, I think it is I don't want to say exactly because I'm losing, sorry, my 3 a.m. brain is.
It's not a big deal, I guess.
Yes, but those would be the potential value chains that we think could actually make a great dent. Yeah.
Well, so despite the structural challenges and severe shocks facing African countries, the economic outlook is positive. Growth is expected to reach 3.7% in 2024, underlining the resilience of African economies. For Latin America and the Caribbean, the World Bank forecasts regional GDP growth at 1.6% in 2024, the lowest of any region in the world. Could this asymmetry create a trade imbalance between the regions?
It's possible, but not necessarily, in the sense that what is traded between two regions is what creates asymmetries, not necessarily whether one is growing faster than the other. Because if you look at the trade, for example, between Europe and Africa, or who owns the primary commodities, who owns the major products, but there is an imbalance. Why? Because of the terms of trade. And so the fact that the Caribbean or Latin America are not growing as fast as Africa does not necessarily mean that there will be an imbalance. It depends on the goods and services that become part of a free trade agreement or part of a partial scope agreement for the countries.
All right. So the idea of the Africa-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum was born in 2021, which followed the inaugural Africa-CARICOM Summit. It was established as a key strategic activity to institutionalize cooperation between the private sectors of the two regions to develop their trade and investment relationships. What major advances have been made since then, in your opinion?
Well, since then, we have done one study which identified very specific areas. Then we've done an update of that study. And then what we've decided is that as part of that study, we will begin to flesh out the 5 specific value chains that have been identified and begin to look at how we can negotiate between the two regions the lowering of tariffs, the lower of non-tariff barriers, the increasing of logistics, looking at services trade, which is frankly 70% of the opportunities, and building the kind of mechanisms that will actually make it happen. So we're now moving from the ideas phase to the implementation phase. How are we going to make this happen?
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Pamela Milton, for answering Africa 24's English questions.
Thank you.
It was our pleasure to have you. Ladies and gentlemen, here comes an end to this program, but stay tuned because you are still on Africa 24 English.